As mentioned, I'm Tom Ray. I'm the moderator, and I can't figure out why they chose me as a moderator. I've never been known as a moderate person. So,
it's radical.
Moderation in all things, including moderation, of course. I'm really proud to be sitting on stage with pioneers, people who they also served, who sold. You know, you can build things, but until a sale is made, nothing happened. And all the gentlemen on this stage, you know, were highly instrumental in setting up the marketing and sales of analog voltage-controlled instruments. Mike Brigida, Tom Piggott, Dave Frederick, you know, they were competitors. I was with that outfit where they had the out-of-tune synthesizer, which was okay. So I guess I would sort of like to lead this off by asking Dave, in particular, I know you were very instrumental in setting up the dealer network and the point of purchase, as it was called, for ARP, really around the world. And I wonder if you'd just talk about how difficult was that to do in an era where nobody knew about these things, and you know, what did you encounter, and how did you make it work, and things like that?
Well, I got thrown out of a few music stores.
You bet.
You know, back in that time, because people didn't know what synthesizers were, and it was a very challenging thing. Just to back up a little bit in history, I had a friend who was a musician and owned a music store in Worcester, Massachusetts, and he called me up one day and he said, "Hey," he says, "I got this thing." He says, "I don't know what it is." He says, "But it's really cool." He said, "You got to come up and see it." So I went up there and I saw it, and it was the ARP 2600. It was the powder blue version. And I said, "Well, what is this thing?" He says, "I don't know." He says, "It's got holes and buttons and you stick stuff in it." I said, "Okay." So I started sticking stuff in it. And it's a very long story, but 2 weeks later he asked me to do an in-store concert with Lowry Organ's 2600. So Al found out about it, and Marvin, and I think Manny Mandel came down, three of them, to say, "Well, you know, nobody plays this live. This is ridiculous." And they came down and I played it live, and I just did trumpets, and I did choo-choo trains pulling out of the station and crazy sounds with the white noise generator and stuff. And I said, "Wow, if you ever want to leave Lowry, you want to come work with us." And that's how I got on board with ARP. And I started my adventure there as sales, and then continued. And as Mike said earlier, I saw him at a music store, and I figured this young man has tremendous potential, is extremely talented. And so I brought Mike on board as the product specialist to get involved. And then as we started, it's really interesting stories, because we started it was like a big garage, wasn't it? It was like a garage. And it was on a dirt road, a small dirt road. And in the wintertime, you know, you got to remember, it's in the 70s, so we used to wear polyester pants and big floppy shirts, you know, collars. And we had space heaters underneath the chairs in the wintertime, and we'd burn more holes in our pants, you know, trying to get stuff done, getting out of there. And it was an interesting thing about how a company started, small and humble. And I remember we had these long tables, and we'd be building these synthesizers, and at the end of the month, everybody chipped in. So we'd have beer and pizza, and we'd be up there and we'd be soldering wires and getting everything ready, and we'd take the synthesizers and put them on the dock, because then you could call it a receivable and you could go to the bank and borrow money to make payroll. And that's how we survived in the beginning stages. So we started building up and growing. We went to a couple of trade shows and showed the soloists and stuff, and then we were going to do the pro soloists. So one of the engineers was Jeremy Hill. He was the main designer for the pro soloist, and he had a breadboard in his house. This is how this happens. And it was in the basement of his house. So they sent me down there to keep an eye on him, and I went down, and he had this breadboard stretched across his big workbench, and he was a vegetarian, so we would sit there and drink beer and eat bananas, and he'd be flipping switches, and I would say, you know, make it brighter, no, make it this way, and I would basically voice it just from listening, and that's how the Pro Solos was created. So then we came out with another instrument, obviously the Odyssey. And the Odyssey was white, and it was really interesting because the first model, they did a 2-pole filter, and it was white. And I said, "No, we don't want a 2-pole filter. We want a 4-pole filter. We got to sound like a Moog. You know, we got to have that fat sound." And so I lost, and we came out with a 2-pole filter Odyssey, the first one. We didn't sell that many. So I finally won the argument. We came out with a 4-pole, and then I painted it black. We had it painted black. And then I said, you know, we've got to find a way. There's a psychology about eye movements and association of buttons and dials and switches. So I came up with the idea of having these little color, little rubber things that we put on top. So we had different colors for the oscillator and the ADSR and so on and so forth. And that's how the Odyssey came about. And then they decided, well, you know what we need to do? We need to have another instrument that's a single synthesizer, which was the axe. So I named all these. I named the Odyssey, then I named the axe, because again, if you remember, I don't know if they do it today. Do they still call it their instruments the axe today? In the 70s, it was your axe.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So we're still in tune here. So I called it the axe. And then we had there's a single one. And then I said, well, it needs a buddy. So we decided to come up with this little, just without a keyboard, the axe without a keyboard, and I called it the little brother. And that was the little brother of the axe. And that's how we got the little brother, which was the module without the keyboard, which was kind of cool, you know? So we had that, and then I was at a trade show in Europe, and I was walking around and I was hearing this organ, and I was hearing these string sounds. I'm like, wow, this is incredible. So I went over to the managing director and talked to him. I said, these are awesome. I said, I'll tell you what. I said, can you take those and put them in a box for me? And we had negotiations and back and forth and everything else, and they pulled the strings out, put them in a circuit board, put them in a box. It was heavy, too, and sent it to us, and I named it the ARP Ensemble. So that was the first that we had. And then it was really funny because we were in the room messing around with, I think it was Clark Ferguson, service manager at the time, and I said, look, can you cut the phasers on this? And he said, sure, because I wanted to see what it would sound like if I ran it through the Odyssey. So he cut the phasers on it, and basically we ran it through the Odyssey. We got these horn sounds and everything else. So the second generation of the ARP Ensemble was 2 buttons, and one was basically said horns, which dislocated the phasers, and the other one was strings. And that was a forerunner to the Omni that we had back then in product. So we had to figure out how is the world going to, like you say, how is the world going to know what synthesizers were, because it played one note at a time. And we had to let the world know that you could use this as a musical instrument, not just a studio instrument or something in colleges for electronic music. So I said, well, we got to have something very unique. So we tried to say, what are we going to do to let the world know? So we came up with the idea of the ARP NAMM Jam. And jamming is just, as you know, if you're a musician, you jam, you know, together. So ARP, NAMM, which was the National Association of Music Merchants, and then jam. So I was thinking, okay, what are we going to do? Something really cool and unique. So I got this idea that, you know, we'll have to have some point-of-purchase materials and souvenirs. So I went out and bought up 4 cases of strawberry jam. Yeah. And we took the labels off of them after the factory closed in hot water, and we put a label on them, and I called it ARP NAMM Jam. And then it said ingredients, and then we put 2600, Odyssey, you know, Pro Soloist and that. And then after that, I put down there starring, and then of course Mike Brigida, Tom Piggott, myself, and then Cleve Posar, which is an amazing percussionist. And we had these things on the tables, and we went and rehearsed. And after work at hours, we rehearsed for hours, and we put together a show. And you've got to understand, back in that time, in the 70s, the 3 of us would be on the floor demonstrating, selling. I'm talking to dealers and distributors. Mike is demonstrating, Tom's demonstrating at the product. And then we're on a cement floor for 8 hours. So we go back to the hotel, jump in the shower, come on back out, and then we put on a 3-hour show, I guess. We did, yeah, two parts. And then we had guest artists that we had. Bill Horn was one of the guest artists. He played organ. He had about 4 or 5 synthesizers. And another amazing artist that we had with us was Don Lewis. In fact, he's right here. Stand up, Don. Great musician, great performer, just a super all-around guy. It's just, it amazes me. I haven't seen you in, 30 years? Yeah, and you haven't changed. You see, it's amazing. So what we tried to do is get the world's attention that you could play these things live. So we're figuring out how we're going to do this ARP NAMM Jam, because we only can play one note at a time. And so we tried to figure it out. So Mike decided he's going to build these stands. So he went and welded these stands together so that we could play like this. So we had one keyboard here, then one up here, one over here. So I had this, Mike had this, Tom was playing the Odyssey and doing bass patterns and the Odyssey, of course, and we put together the ARP Nam Jam. And it just blew the world away because it was just, they never heard anything like it. I mean, it was 3 guys and a drummer, and we sounded, I think, pretty awesome, for what we did. And it just introduced to the world, wow, you can play these things live. And it was synthesizers, it was fantastic. But going back a step on the marketing side, I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, okay, we have an Odyssey, but we need to do something. So I came up with the color things, and then I came up with the color patches for the 2600, and we used to have them hanging around our neck. We thought it was really cool, to have those around our neck. And so we had color patches, and then we did overlays, because you needed to, besides the patch book, that we talked about earlier, we had to have overlays. So we had these overlays, and it would have different sounds on them for the Odyssey. So cello, rock guitar, theremin, things like that. And you would take them and lay them on top of the Odyssey and just line up the sliders. And it was really cool. In fact, I've got some in my briefcase over here I'll show you. That has, which is the original overlays for the Odyssey. And then we did, of course, the patchwork for the 2600, which we all participated in. And these are point of purchase, and these are ways to help people because they didn't know. I mean, you have to think about it. Synthesizers like the 2600 was the 1970s version of the Legos. It was basically a foundation that you built upon, and you connected this, connected that, connected this, connected that, and that's what we did with the 2600. And we come up with some amazing sounds. It was really funny because I came up with a song called the Wampus. And the Wampus sound was a very scary sound. It scared the hell out of you. And when you listen to it, it was something that my wife and I used to say to the kids when they were really young. You better get in the house before the sun goes down. The Wampus is going to get you. Because it was a half man, half frog. We'd tell them it would come out and get you. What a thing for parents to say, right? And then Mike came up with a 2600 version of a patch that actually did deep breathing. It would be like somebody calling you up on a phone and going, I was always worried about I was always worried about that patch, Mike.
No, I was never worried about that patch. If anybody called on the phone and went, I said, oh, it's for you, dear.
But it was a great patch, And we had a lot of very interesting patches that we did, very creative patches. I mean, the ocean sounds, birds singing, and we did all kinds of creative things to let the world know what you could do with this amazing instrument. So when I started, it was probably, in my career at ARP, it was the happiest time of my life. Musically, the ability to create sounds, the ability to do this. And we had these demo records that we did, and Mike was on some of the demo records, to get the sound out so people could hear what you could actually do with synthesizers. And it was amazing. But again, most of my life, that was the happiest time that I've ever had in building, working with a team, developing sales, marketing around the world, like you said, and then doing all the different instruments and configurations and everything else. It was a very creative and loving time, and then having a family like Tom and like Mike was just priceless. And what did it start with? One guy, this gentleman right here, Alan Perlman. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have had this experience. I would not have been able to show that creativity and everything else if it wasn't for Al being able to do this and started this whole thing. So he started a revolution that was a sound that was heard around the world, basically. And then that's, I know, it's kind of an interesting, it wasn't a shot, it was a sound.
Fortunately.
Yeah, that was heard around the world. And it was because of Al starting this and had this vision and this concept. And then we took that and then we turned it into a musical odyssey and allowed people to hear it and to be able to experience it. And, the rest is history as it evolved. It was great. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
All right, fantastic.